With a deep hatred for the church, this man wished to murder the Archbishop of Canterbury. He stated that he longed to murder all Christian scum. My name's Emma, this is True Crime with Emma, and this week we're going to look at the case of Stephen Farrow. If you like true crime, please feel free to give this video a like and subscribe. I also have a podcast on Spotify. Just search for True Crime with Emma. Stephen Farrow was born in the Midlands in 1964. He was one of 6 children to very deeply religious parents, Doreen and Reginald. His relationship with his father was problematic. His dad was very strict, and him and Stephen often clashed. His mother, on the other hand, doted on Stephen and was very, very caring. So growing up, Stephen had conflicting parental guidance. He was also a very hyperactive child from a young age. On his first day at school, he was sent home due to his hyperactive behaviour. From then on, his behaviour spiralled, as did his deep-seated hatred for the church. Aged 10, he set fire to an altar and just sat there and watched it burn. He later states that this hatred for religion came from being sexually abused by a priest as a young boy. As an adult, he had few friends. He was sort of a bit of a loner. He was in and out of prison, smoked cannabis and drank alcohol. At this point, he was a petty criminal doing sort of burglary, pickpocketing, but these crimes began to escalate and they did so very quickly. In 1994, he was in prison for burglary. Because of his good behaviour, he was allowed out on day release. On that day, he went and visited 78-year-old Stella Crow. Stella Crow ran an unofficial B&B in Stourbridge. Stephen vaguely knew her from before, and it seems as though he was seeking her out in order to stay overnight. When Stella answers the door, Stephen immediately begins to attack her. He pushes her backwards and grabs a knife from his pocket. He begins to threaten her with a knife, and initially it's more of a scuffle. However, Stephen quickly begins to get incredibly violent. He starts punching this 78-year-old elderly lady in the face repeatedly, so much so that her teeth are knocked out. He violently attacks her to the point where she falls unconscious on the floor. She is beaten black and blue. As she lay there unconscious, Stephen makes his way to the kitchen where he rummages through her cupboards. He grabs £24, which he finds in a tin, and leaves. So he has beaten this 78-year-old lady black and blue, left her for dead, all for £24. Stella Crow does manage to survive, and the police do track Stephen down. They corner him, and like a vicious animal, he begins attacking them. He does not want to be arrested. He goes so far as to bite one of the police officers. Once in custody, he is sent for a psychiatric evaluation. It's there where he confesses to the psychologist that he has fantasies of raping his victims after he's burgled them. He also confesses that he has intense desires to murder and that 6 years prior, he did murder a hiker in Devon. The psychiatrist deems these to be exaggerated fantasies and states that Stephen is better off in prison than a hospital. Stephen gets a prison sentence, but in the early 2000s, he is released early on good behaviour, and for a long time, he kind of disappears. He goes into kind of this nomadic lifestyle. He lives off-grid. He lives in the woods. He goes fishing for his food. He shoplifts and kind of pickpockets to survive as well. For a long time, he is very isolated and very detached from society. He travels up and down the country, mainly living nearby rivers so that he could catch fish. In 2012, so around 12 years after he is released, he is fishing on a river near Bewdley. It's there where he spots Betty Yates's cottage. Betty Yates is a 77-year-old widow and ex-teacher. She lives in a very rural area in a cottage that's quite isolated from other people. Stephen Farrow spots Betty's cottage and decides on that day that he is going to burgle that home. Farrow forces himself into Betty's home. He grabs a walking stick and brutally begins attacking her. He then takes his knife from his pocket again and stabs her 4 times. On the last time, he leaves the knife embedded in her neck. After brutally murdering this 77-year-old lady, he leisurely takes a walk around her home, locks the doors, closes the blinds, and then just disappears. Her body was discovered shortly after the next day, and when forensics arrived, they noticed something slightly odd. Betty's head had been placed on a pillow, and before you think maybe this was some odd act of empathy, what they discover is that the pillow was placed there before Farrow began stabbing her. Explanations for this are perhaps the sound of her head rolling along the floor was annoying Farrow, therefore he tried to prop it up with a pillow. Or perhaps the pillow provided some kind of sound barrier for when he was attacking her and stabbing her. A month after Betty Yates' murder, and the police have no leads and no real evidence to go on, they offer a £10,000 reward for any information leading to an arrest. Farrow has gone off-grid again. He is living a nomadic lifestyle and he makes his way up to Thornbury. It's now February of 2012 and he comes across a reverend's home, Reverend John Suddards. This Reverend John Suddards was known as a very generous man. He had only recently in the last few years moved to that little village. He wanted to help those in need and would often leave his porch open for homeless people or people travelling through to rest there for the night. And on one particular night of February 2012, Stephen Farrow knocked on his door. When Reverend John opens the door, Farrow immediately begins to attack him. He stabs him multiple times in the chest, arms and head. John is putting up a fight. When he's found, he has multiple defensive wounds. At one point, he gets back up off the floor, and Farrow at this point is getting very irritated. He pushes him back down and says to John, "Just hurry up and die." You can tell by this point that Stephen Farrow is getting irritated and annoyed at how long this process is taking. He obviously believed that he could just walk in and murder John Suddards quite quickly. This also shows just how selfish Farrow is. He's getting irritated and annoyed at John for kind of taking up his time. When John collapses on the floor for the final time, Stephen Farrow decides to make a scene. Stephen places John's body opposite a mirror and begins to scatter around condoms, pornography, erotic DVDs, men's magazines, gay pornography. He then lays a Jesus Christ canvas over the body. It's very clear that he has every intention of trying to humiliate John Suddards, even in death. After staging this scene, Stephen Farrow then goes to the kitchen, grabs a couple of beers, sits down and watches a movie. He makes himself at home. He's not panicking, he's not kind of freaking out, trying to cover anything up or trying to cover his tracks. He is very, very calm. And then he just leaves. 4 days later, some builders arrive at Reverend John's house and discover his body. The police immediately suspect Farrow and send out a warning to the public to not approach this man. Due to Farrow's nomadic lifestyle, it is incredibly difficult to track him down or make an arrest, but due to an anonymous tip, they managed to locate him. This was just 1 day after John Suddards' body was discovered. Stephen Farrow is therefore officially charged with the murders of Betty Yates and John Suddards. He pleads not guilty to both murders, but later he does admit to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility for the murder of John Suddards. The jury, however, found him guilty on both counts of murder, and the judge said that these were sadistic killings and sentenced him to life in prison. Farrow died in prison, aged 58 in 2023. He was an opportunistic and sadistic killer. He obviously wanted to humiliate his victims. He never showed any remorse during trials, confessions, and although he was a hyperactive child, there was no real violence in his past, apart from the burning of the altar. He was a petty criminal, but this very, very quickly escalated. He obviously had a deep hatred of anyone who was religious. If you have any case suggestions, please let me know in the comments below. If you liked this video, please feel free to give it a like. My name's Emma, this has been True Crime with Emma, and I will see you next time.